Ethan Hayes lived alone on a small island far from any city. The waves were his only company, and the wind was his only friend. He woke when the sky turned pale and worked until the sun sank behind the sea. His small house stood on the edge of the cliffs. It was made of stone, strong against the storms, but quiet inside. He once belonged to the great city of Solara, where tall glass towers touched the clouds. In that city, he was known as a man of ideas. He built machines that could clean the air, draw water from dust, and feed hundreds from one garden. People praised him at first. They called him a genius. But after the praise came fear. Some said his machines were too powerful, that they would replace workers and anger the nobles. Others whispered that Ethan planned to use his inventions to rise above the queen herself. Lies spread quickly, and like a fire in dry grass, his name was burned. They took him from the city in chains, but he did not speak. He did not fight. Perhaps part of him already longed for silence. The queen signed his exile. He was sent here to this end of the world, where he was meant to grow old and be forgotten. For 12 years, that is exactly what he did. He learned to fish, to gather rainwater, and to fix tools when they broke. He grew small gardens and watched them with patience. Sometimes he spoke aloud to himself, just to remember the sound of his voice. On the cracks of the old table, he carved small lines, one for each passing month. The wood was full of scars now. He often thought when he made the last mark, his heart might stop too. Yet it never did. Some nights, when the tide ran high and the stars burned bright, Ethan looked across the water and wondered if the people of Solara still lived under the towers he built. He imagined the lights shining there, so many that the sky must glow gold above the city. He thought about the queen who had once smiled when he presented his inventions, and later turned away when the council demanded his exile. He wondered if she ever remembered his name. The sea was calm, a glass sheet under the pale sun. Then he saw something strange, dark shaped far on the horizon. At first, he thought it was a storm, but it moved too smoothly. He stood and shaded his eyes. It was a group of riders. The horses glinted in the light, and silver armor flashed like mirrors. Ethan's heart tightened. No one came here. No one even knew where he lived, except perhaps those who sent him here long ago. The sound of hooves on stone reached his ears, slow and heavy. The riders climbed the rocky slope to his home. The one in front carried a white flag with the royal symbol, golden sun rising from the sea. Ethan wiped his hands and waited by the door. The leading rider stopped and lowered his helmet. He was a young man, face sharp as carved wood. He looked at Ethan, bowed shortly, and pulled out a sealed letter. "Ethan Hayes," he said, his voice formal but uncertain. "By order of Her Majesty, you are called to return." Ethan blinked, slow and puzzled. "Return?" he asked. His voice was rough from disuse. "You must be mistaken. I was exiled." The soldier did not answer. He only held out the letter. The seal was made of gold wax, shaped with the mark of the crown. Ethan hesitated before taking it. The paper felt heavy, almost warm. He broke the seal and opened it. The message inside was short, written in the fine script he remembered from the palace walls. "By command of Her Majesty Queen Isabella Rohan, you are summoned to the capital of Solara. Your knowledge is required. You shall not refuse." Ethan lowered the letter slowly. For a moment, he said nothing. The gulls cried above, the waves broke softly on the rocks, and the wind carried the smell of salt. "Required," he murmured to himself. The word felt strange in his mouth. 12 years of silence, and now they needed him again. The city had forgotten him, yet its seals still knew his name. The soldier waited, watching him without expression. Ethan looked around at his quiet home one last time. The walls he built from sea stones, the tools lined neatly by the door, the tiny garden where green leaves trembled in the wind. This little life was all he had left, but it had kept him whole. He turned back to the letter. Whatever awaited him in Solara, he knew one thing. The past was not done with him yet. And slowly, with calm eyes and a quiet heart, Ethan Hayes packed his satchel and prepared to follow the riders back into the world that had once destroyed him. Ethan followed the riders across the barren coast. The road wound through long fields where the grass moved like waves in the wind. For many miles he did not speak, and neither did the soldiers. Their horses beat a steady rhythm against the ground, and only the cries of distant birds broke the silence. Ethan thought about the letter again and again. The Queen's handwriting had not changed since the day she signed his exile. He could still see her face in his memory, proud but sad. He had never hated her, not truly. He had hated the voices around her, the ones that whispered lies until her trust in him had been broken. The journey took several days. They traveled through forests that smelled of pine and across rivers bright as silver. Each night the soldiers made a small camp. Ethan would sit by the fire, quiet and thoughtful, while they spoke softly among themselves. Sometimes he felt their glances, as if they could not decide whether to respect him or fear him. Once, one of them asked, "Is it true you made the machines that feed the eastern cities?" Ethan only nodded. The man looked at him longer, as if trying to see the truth of legend in an ordinary face. On the 5th morning they reached the first outpost of Solara. The city rose far away, but already shone like a second sun. Ethan had almost forgotten its brightness. The towers were taller than before, built with new glass that caught and scattered light. It was beautiful, but there was something uneasy in the air. The riders slowed as they passed through the lower gates. People stopped and stared. Some pointed. A few whispered his name. He could hear the disbelief in their voices. The man who built their machines had returned from exile. As they reached the grand road that led to the palace, the noise of the city grew louder. Markets filled the streets. Vendors called the passing crowds. Children ran behind the horses, laughing. The smell of bread and smoke filled the air. Ethan looked all around him, noting that parts of the city looked richer, while others looked worn, almost tired. Here and there he saw broken machines standing silent in the corners, once bright with energy, now lifeless. His old work, abandoned and failing. The Queen's banner hung above the great gates of the palace. The soldiers dismounted quickly. One of them took Ethan's satchel before he could speak, saying that all guests must pass through examination. He followed them through the gate, walking across white stone that shone like ice. The halls beyond were wide and cool, guarded by men in silver armor. Servants hurried past, some carrying scrolls or trays of wine. They looked at Ethan with frightened eyes, as if unsure how to greet a man who had returned from silence. They led him to a small room where he was told to wait. He spent what felt like hours there, sitting at a long table with nothing but his thoughts. He traced the smooth surface with his fingers and remembered the feel of his island as simple wood. When the door opened, light flooded the room, and a tall woman entered. She wore plain blue rather than royal gold. Her eyes were dark, her expression calm. Something in the way she moved told Ethan that this was the Queen herself. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she smiled, the same soft smile he remembered from long ago. "Ethan Hayes," she said gently, "you have come home." He bowed his head slightly, unsure what to say. "I came because the letter said I must." He lifted his eyes. "But I do not know what I can still give." The Queen stepped closer. "You gave us years of life once. The city still breathes because of you. But the heart of Solara falters. The machines that feed our land do not respond. My advisors have tried to fix them. They failed." She paused. "You built their cores. Only you can restore them." Ethan studied her face. Only weariness, only weariness." "Why now?" he asked quietly. "After all the years," the Queen lowered her gaze, "'cause I was wrong to send you away." The words came slowly but true, and because Solara will die if pride rules longer. Ethan looked out through the window behind her. From this height he could see the whole city, its towers, its streets, its veins of light flickering weakly between rooftops. He saw both beauty and decay, woven together like threads of the same cloth. He remembered the joy he once felt creating these systems, the sense of purpose. A quiet strength began to stir in him again. "I am no courtman," he said at last. "I do not serve the voices that condemned me." "You will serve no voice but your own," the Queen answered. "Only help me save what still can be saved." The room fell silent again, filled only by the soft hum of distant engines. Finally, Ethan spoke. "Then I will see the machines.
Oh.
If they can be awakened, I will awaken them." A hint of relief crossed her face. "Then come with me," she said. Your city awaits its maker once more. She turned toward the great doors, and Ethan followed. The echo of their footsteps filled the hall, carrying his past and her hope into the heart of the shining empire. Ethan walked beside the queen through long corridors filled with light. The palace was built from glass and stone, cool and silent except for the tapping of their steps. Outside, the city glimmered through the tall windows, the same city Ethan had once dreamed of shaping. He could see the towers he designed years ago standing proud but dim, their energy fading. The queen led him down a spiral stairway lined with silver lanterns, each glowing weakly as if tired after a long night. When they reached the lower levels, the air grew warmer. The hum of machinery came faintly from below, like the pulse of some great sleeping heart. The queen looked at Ethan and said quietly, "Everything you've built still stands, but it suffers. It is as if the city has lost its breath." Ethan nodded. Machines are alive in their own way. They need care, not command. She watched him closely. "You speak of them as if they were people. They are not people," he replied, "but they carry the rhythm of human hands. When we forget that, they grow silent. The same way a song dies when no one sings it." They reached a large round door of metal and glass. 2 guards pulled a lever, and the door slid open. Inside, a huge room spread before them, his old workshop. Ethan stopped short. The air smelled of oil and dust. The tables were covered in old blueprints and broken tools. He touched the surface of one machine, and his fingers came away gray with ash. It felt like returning to a dream he had left behind. The queen stepped forward. "We kept it untouched since you left. No one else dared to change what you built." Ethan walked deeper into the hall. Pipes lined the walls leading toward a large core at the center. It once glowed with soft light, feeding energy to the entire city. Now it was dark. Screens around it flickered weakly, flashing symbols from a system long forgotten. He placed his hand on the cold metal surface. For a moment, he closed his eyes, listening. The machine seemed to whisper in silence, a language only he could feel. "The heart is still beating," he said calmly. "It only sleeps. Someone locked its cycle." "Can it wake again?" the queen asked. "It can," he answered, "but it will take time." The trouble began long before it stopped. The balance is broken between the upper towers and the lower districts. The city is using more than it gives. She frowned. "My advisors said the same. They promised to fix it, but failed again and again." "They failed because they looked only at numbers," Ethan said. He opened one of the panels and pointed to a narrow channel running through the wall. "See this? It links the cores through light, not metal. But the light grows weak when the link is poisoned by command codes. You must treat your city as something living, not as a servant." The queen watched him work. Her gaze softened as she saw how his hands moved over the machines with care, almost tenderness. "You speak as one who loves his work as others love people." Ethan smiled faintly. Perhaps it is easier to trust things that cannot lie. A silence settled between them, full of shared understanding. The queen stepped closer, the light from a nearby lamp touching her face. "I see now," she said, "why the city needed you. You build not just with skill, but with belief." He looked up from his work, meeting her eyes. "Belief alone cannot fix what pride has broken, but it can begin." For the next few hours, Ethan studied the circuits, his movements sure and purposeful. The queen stayed beside him, asking small questions and listening carefully to his answers. Sometimes she would bring him tools, and though she was a ruler, there was no pride in her acts-only quiet help. When dusk came, lights began to shimmer faintly across the floor. Soft sound filled the air like distant wind through strings. The machines were waking, little by little. Ethan adjusted the final control and stepped back. Lines of faint blue light crawled through the pipes, slowly brightening. The queen gasped softly. "It lives again." Ethan nodded but did not smile. "This is only the first flame. If the hearts of the upper towers do not balance soon, it will fade once more." He looked tired but satisfied. "Still, this is a beginning." The queen's voice lowered. "When they exiled you, I thought the city had lost its soul. Watching this, I know it truly did." Ethan's expression did not change, but his eyes glowed with something deep, something that had waited years to breathe again. "Could have come from me sooner." Her gaze fell. "I could have. but fear ruled longer than courage. I am trying to change that now. He looked away toward the flickering heart of the core. Then let us both begin again. The Queen slowly reached out her hand. Will you stay in Solara, Ethan Hayes? He paused before answering, looking at the light blooming softly on the metal. If the city still needs me, I cannot walk away. Not yet. And as the core grew brighter, its steady glow reached through the vents and corridors above, rising toward the sleeping towers. For the first time in many years, the city of Solara began to shine again. Its new dawn born from the silence of a man and the faith of a queen. Days turned into weeks as Ethan worked in the secret halls beneath the palace. Every morning, he awoke before sunrise and went straight to the lower chambers. The heavy air smelled of oil and steam, but he found comfort in that. The machines were like old friends returning to life. A quiet hum slowly filled the silence that had once surrounded him. Queen Isabella often visited him there. At first she came only to ask about progress, but soon she stayed longer. She would watch as Ethan repaired a broken valve, cleaned the wires, or drew shapes on the floor with chalk to plan his next move. She did not speak much, yet her presence never disturbed him. Felt natural, familiar, like two souls walking the same road for the first time in years. Sometimes, she brought food from the royal kitchen. Ethan would stop his work for a short while, washing the dust from his hands before sitting across from her. The meals were simple fruit, bread, and tea, but the company made them rich. One evening, after a long day of work, the Queen entered the chamber quietly. The light from the machines painted her face with a soft glow. Ethan was standing near the main control board, his brow lined with tiredness. She said, "You have not rested today." He gave a small nod. "There is still much to repair. Some circuits are older than I expected. Each time I fix one part, another breaks." She stepped closer, watching the tangled lines of cable that ran along the walls. "When I was a child," she said softly, "I used to watch you from the high terrace. You were always surrounded by light and sound. I thought you could speak to the city." Ethan's lips curved slightly. "Maybe I did once. Then do it again," she said, her eyes steady. "Speak to it and tell it to live." Her words carried warmth and faith. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. He realized how much she believed in him, not as a servant of the throne, but as a human being who once gave her kingdom life. It stirred something gentle inside him. During the following days, he noticed the Queen continued to stand beside him, even when others warned her not to. Many royal advisors disliked his return. He heard their whispers in the hallway, calling him the exile who would undo the Queen's rule. Yet Isabella never wavered. She silenced them with calm authority. Her confidence gave him strength. At night, when all others slept, Ethan would climb to the top of the palace and look out over Solara. He watched the lights flicker in the distance where families ate, traded, sang, and dreamed. The machines were beginning to restore those lights again. Life was slowly returning. Still, the energy pulse between the upper towers and the lower districts remained unstable. He needed to find the source of that weakness. One morning, the Queen joined him at the edge of the tower. The city below glowed under the golden sun. She handed him a small silver device. It was the old key that once gave full access to the machine hearts of Solara. "This was yours," she said. "My council kept it hidden all these years. I think it belongs to you again." Ethan turned the key in his hand. The metal was cool and heavy, carrying the memories of past years. "With this," he said, "I can reach the inner heart. But once I open the core, there will be risk. If it fails, the whole city could go dark." "I trust you," she said simply. "That is enough." So on the seventh day, he went deep into the lowest vault below the palace, where the great core rested. Even the guards were not allowed there. Only he and the Queen entered. The chamber was vast and silent. The walls curved like the inside of a shell, and the floor shimmered faintly with reflected light. In the center stood a round pillar with endless channels of moving air and wires, the true heart of Solara. Ethan placed the silver key into the lock and turned it slowly. Sound filled the air, like a deep breath after long sleep. The lights brightened across the chamber, and waves of blue and white energy rippled outward. The ground trembled softly beneath their feet. Ethan stepped back and watched as the lines of energy shot upward into the city through glass pipes. Then screens came alive all around them, showing images of different districts' gardens, swelling with life. fountains running clear, night lamps flickering back on. The city was awakening faster than he had expected. The queen stood silently, her eyes wide and full of awe. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "You have brought it back. You have given Solara its breath again." Ethan looked at her, feeling something he had not felt in many years, a quiet peace. "It was never dead," he said. "It only waited for someone to listen." She smiled faintly. "Then perhaps it was not only the city that needed you." "I did too." The light around them grew warmer, almost gold. For the first time in a long while, Ethan forgot the bitterness of the past. He saw that the queen, despite her crown, carried burdens heavier than chains. She had chosen him not only for his skill, but because she believed he still carried hope. Standing there in the glow of his reborn creation, Ethan realized that the silence he had lived in for 12 long years had been preparing him for this single moment to restore not just a city of light, but 2 hearts long separated by time and regret. The city of Solara shined brighter than anyone remembered. The towers glowed with warm light that touched the clouds at night. The streets below were filled with laughter, markets, and songs. Children ran near the fountains that now flowed clear again. For the first time in many years, people walked without fear of hunger or darkness. They spoke one name again and again in the haze, the man who returned from silence and gave them life once more. Yet Ethan himself did not seek glory. He avoided the cheering crowds and spent most of his hours in the lower chambers, making sure the balance held steady. The machines worked well, but he knew they were like living veins that needed care. If one broke, the others would follow. Queen Isabella often came to see him there, offering news from the surface, the happiness of the people, the rebirth of the gardens, the return of trade. Every time she spoke, he listened quietly, a faint smile touching his face. One evening she said, "Ethan, they call you the savior of Solara. They say the queen should reward you with gold or land. Tell me, what do you want?" He shook his head. "I have no need for gold or land. The city itself is reward enough. To see it living is all I asked of life." She looked at him carefully, her eyes holding something unsaid. "Then will you at least walk beside me at the celebration tomorrow? The people should see the man who brought back their sunrise." He hesitated, but agreed with a small nod. "For the people I will come." The next day, the city gathered in the great square before the palace. Banners waved high, and the air was thick with joy. Musicians played, and citizens cheered as Queen Isabella stepped onto the balcony. She lifted her hand for silence, and the crowd grew still. "My people," she said, "years ago fear and pride cast out a man who built the heart of this city. We lost his wisdom, and our world began to fade. But he returned, not in anger, but in hope. He gave us breath once more. Today, Solara stands renewed because of him." She turned toward Ethan, who stood beside her, quiet and unsure. The crowd erupted in applause, calling his name. Ethan bowed his head slightly, moved more than he wished to show. He was not used to so many eyes watching him, and for a moment the sound of cheering felt like the sea roaring around his old island home. When the applause calmed, the queen spoke again. "Let this day mark a new beginning. Let this city remember not power or titles, but faith and forgiveness. We stand together not as ruler and subject, but as people who share one heartbeat." Ethan looked at her then, truly seeing the courage behind her words. She was no longer just a ruler bound by duty. She was a woman who dared to heal the past. That evening, after the celebration ended and the stars rose over the shimmering towers, Ethan walked with the queen through the quiet palace gardens. The air smelled of rain and jasmine. Lamps glowed softly along the path. They walked without speaking for a long time, listening to the hum of the living city beyond the walls. "Finally," Isabella said, "when I first sent the order to find you, I feared you would refuse. You had every right to hate this place." Ethan answered softly, "I did hate it once. But hate fades when you live alone with the wind and the sea. Silence teaches you many things. It taught me that even those who err can still seek truth." She stopped beside the fountain, watching the ripples dance over the water. "You have given more than words can repay. Still, I wonder if Solara can keep you. Perhaps your heart belongs to the sea again." Ethan looked out beyond the palace walls, where the night sky glowed faintly from the reflection of the towers. I thought so too, he said. But perhaps I stayed away not because I was free, but because I was waiting for a reason to return. The queen met his gaze, her expression calm but full of feeling. Then stay, she said gently. Not as my servant, not as my subject. Stay because this city is yours as much as mine. Stay because the future needs both dreamers and believers. He looked down at the water, watching the light tremble on its surface. I will stay, he said, not for the city, but for what it stands for now, a second chance. From that night, Ethan became more than an engineer. He became the quiet guide of Solara's new age. Together, he and Queen Isabella worked to build bridges between districts, to teach new builders the lessons of balance and patience. Years later, people still told stories about the man who came back from exile and the queen who trusted him when no one else would. The city itself grew into a symbol of hope across the Lanza, place where forgiveness had built more power than war ever could. In the end, when Ethan stood once more on the high terrace, watching the dawn spread over the silver towers, he smiled faintly. The winds from the sea carried the scent of his old life, yet his heart no longer yearned for the island. The silence he once lived in had turned into music again. The people of Solara began calling that time the Age of Renewal. But for Ethan and Isabella, it was simply the life they built to hearts once weary, now beating in quiet harmony with the city they had saved.